after me, and she will really give you some insight about soil health improvement that's needed and all the things that it can result in at a watershed wide scale. So we'll go to share my screen and we'll get started. Everybody see that?
Looks great.
Good. All right. So I titled this Kansas Healthy Watersheds, A New Frontier in Addressing Water Quality and Quantity on a Watershed Scale, because I've been working a lot on watershed from a water quality standpoint, but I don't know that we've been working a whole lot from a quantity, whether it's resilience from drought or also reducing flash flooding. And there's all sorts of information coming out now. I just forwarded an article with a YouTube video to Ann this morning about how they're looking at this in Iowa, and the title of that YouTube actually is Crops for Flooding. So I'll want to give you a little bit of background on the watershed management section. We're funded through Environmental Protection Agency Clean Water Act Section 319 and state water plan funds. Our main goal is to develop and implement the Kansas Non-Point Source Pollution Management Plan, which is required by those for the state to take those funds. But we also have some state water plan funds that come out of our legislature. So who we are, we are a section of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, but we inform the public about the expectations and regulations regarding water quality in Kansas. But we also assist in meeting the needs to protect and restore the water quality. And sometimes we are the messenger between the regulated public and the state of Kansas. Excuse me. So what we wanted to talk about today was, since we do administer the 319 section 319 program, and we're trying to be agile enough to meet the current needs and progressive enough to look at the future needs of the support to restore and protect the waters of the state. Well, in order to do that, we really had to start building partnerships using our relationships and to find these technical assistance, financial assistance to meet these goals and the expectations of Kansas citizens. And, an example of that from a water quality standpoint is the NRCS National Water Quality Initiative, where you actually have to have a watershed plan before these specific practices are eligible to be cost shared on. So the water quality goals in our state, in Kansas, no violation of water quality standards for designated uses due to non-point sources. All Kansas non-point sources use water quality protection measures and achieve Kansas water plan objectives. Our water quality standards actually have a citation that says anything that doesn't require a federal NPDES discharge permit is considered a non-point source. Agriculture is our largest land use. It has the greatest potential to an opportunity to really help with our water quality issues. So we've come up with a watershed restoration protection strategy, or RAPS. This is a collaborative solution that we've developed this process. As you can see, there's stakeholders involved. There's watershed goals involved. There's plans to achieve those goals, implement the plans, and this all has to be approved by EPA as far as the context and the process. And, we have 14 of these active right now. We had 37, but we had a lot of funding cuts, so we had to change our scope a little bit. But one of the things I wanted to point out was all the different pursuing of new funding and technical assistance sources. And the reason why I bring this up is because in the last year or so is the first time that we have ever worked with a hazard mitigation team. And that brought in FEMA, and it also brought in the Silver Jackets with Brian. We worked with General Mills, and of course we've done a lot with non-government organizations. We have a Kansas Association of Conservation Districts that we have to fund. We actually fund for specific high priority watershed counties. This is the RAPS priority areas. All those colored, whether they're dendritic or whether they're polygons, are our priority watersheds. And then the ones that are not colored in gray, so to speak, are watershed priority areas that were actually in a plan, but the sponsor could not keep the plan intact for funding reasons or staffing reasons or what have you. But we still give funds to the Association of Conservation Districts so they can distribute those funds to them. So here's one of our success stories. Black Vermilion River, we actually had implemented soil health principles, and we looked through this and found that we removed the Black Vermilion River off of the impaired waters list in 2020. And we're looking at maybe it help increase the life of dams in those areas. I think the biggest take home today is how we need to look at the mechanisms for water quality protection. And the way we look at this is all these different mechanisms that all these different type of practices produce. But what I want to really focus on is infiltrate and percolate and reduce the runoff. And we've convinced EPA that if we can reduce the runoff, whatever it means, then, our buffers and those kind of things are really second. And we're finding that some people don't want buffers, takes land away from their production. And so we think this is a good way to try to meet some of those needs. So one of the things we did was start the peer-to-peer mentoring and resources. We had an EPA farmer-to-farmer grant from the Gulf Hypoxia program. We have a soil health coaching for workshop participants. And this is around several higher priority watersheds in the state. And then we have the Western Kansas soil health coaching, which is really different because in Western Kansas we get 6 to 12 inches of rain annual. So there's a real need out there for looking at these kind of things. And we've developed with several other state agencies. We started funding a Kansas Soil Health Alliance, which is completely farmer board driven. And they've been really tremendous at getting the word out, trying to help people understand soil health and the economics, but also the ecosystem service benefits we think are really important for people to know. So here's what we really look at. If you look at this is across from my house out in the rural area in South Topeka, and this happens every time we get a 2 to 3 inch rainfall, and you can kind of picture this up and down your roads or your watershed. This is going on all the time. So what we need to do then is we need to look at ways to try to increase the infiltration rate and the aggregate stability to improve that soil health, to make that happen, to keep that water on the land and in the soil for the crops. Well, I went through this process with our hazard mitigation team folks, and one of the things that we're looking at was this BRIC Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. But I noticed their project where nature-based solutions were all really up in the watershed or around the town. And up in the watershed were really more about purchasing land and those kind of things. And then putting riparian areas and putting buffers and wetlands around the different communities. That just doesn't work in our state very well. We've already tried some of that. So we went through and looked at some of the watershed area solutions. Dams are a possibility, but they're very expensive, hard to maintain, hard to fund to maintain. But we think that strategically located regenerative ag practices can really help revive the rural communities, produce healthy food, but also try to cut off some of that high peak flow that we have through these flooding. So here's what we looked at. All those that are completely marked out at the bottom are all coastal, so those are not available for us. The ones in the pink we've already demonstrated, and they really either not considered a water quality priority in our plan, or they just haven't worked very well because of the maintenance issues. And then the caution yellow is on the private land, but that's where we need to work. We need to work with these large landmass, agricultural land masses. So one of the things that hasn't been really talked about was just what about the frequently flooded bridges or roads? And so we're going to try to work with those folks, not necessarily on a community basis, but more on a small focused pilot for bridges. And some of those bridges, they're Mercia route, they're historic. And so there's some really good benefits for that. Real quick, what we looked at was this water quality protection restoration. These practices were are really out of the NRCS book, and what we found was that we have been doing buffers and we have been doing all these other practices for decades, and we're still not moving the needle on water quality. So we decided to kind of go down this road of getting more infiltration on broad expanses of land. We've got workshops and producers that we've heard farmers experience about seeing streams run in, first time in 15 years. And also, we also have heard about getting in the field 3 days sooner than the guy across the road because their soil health is so much more improved. So, the economics of soil health, we've been hearing a lot of farmers that are being able to uh, have some economic gain because of the reduced input costs. But I'm really hopeful that we can find a way to pay farmers for infiltrating more rainfall for runoff reduction. And we improve the water quality, but we also reduce the peak flow, and we store more water for drier times from consistent crop years. But this all has to be on a watershed scale. And so, with that, I'll say be great, infiltrate with healthy soils. You have my information in front of you. And next up is Candy Thomas, Natural Resources Conservation Service, Regional Soil Health Specialist. She's going to provide information to show you why watershed-wide soil health improvement is the key to addressing many of our natural resources. And I will
Thanks, Scott.
stop sharing.
All right. I'll wait and then I will share. Or maybe I'll just steal.
There you go.
Okay. I'm gonna put this in this mode. And then I'm gonna, there we go. Let me move something. Hold on just a second. I had the set and then it went backwards. Display. Swap. Okay. Done, done. All right, let's see if this does it. And it didn't. There we are. Does that look correct?
We're still not seeing it, Candy. Can you double
It says
click?
it's paused. Is this my wonderful, lovely? It might
It's
be
a
my
black
goofy.
screen.
It's my goofy internet here again. Oh my word, are you kidding? The screen is paused. Resume. How about resume? Did that
Scott,
do
what if
anything?
you share yours? Don't you have your version of Candy's?
Do you have my version?
There we go.
It's working.
Is it working?
We see it. Now I just got to do it in presentation mode and you're good to go.
Okay, let me swap sides.
Oops, we lost it there.
Oh, hold on. Let me put it back. Sorry about that. It was working a minute ago. How about that? Share.
There you go.
That good?
Not yet. There we go. Now we see it. Now we see it.
Oh, it's quite the saga. All right, I'm Candy Thomas, Regional Soil Health Specialist. I cover 4 states, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma. And we are part of the Soil Health Division in the Department of Agriculture. And we're kind of, I wouldn't say we're in a new division anymore because we've been around since 2015, 2016. But some people have never really heard of us. But what we do is we assist states with getting soil health management systems in place. So first off, learning what they are, and then secondly, how to implement those productively with the landowner. And so what we're going to look at is what happens when we improve soil health from a water infiltration and storage standpoint. So as you can see, population growth is upon us, that we're going to incur more humans. And the problem is that we're losing some of our ag soils, mainly due to, soil sealing, as you can see in the percent of urban and built up land area. And then also just conversion to non-crop is another issue. We talk about changing climate mainly from a water rainfall standpoint. So we have streams that are more intense, less frequent, and their duration is really off. So we're having a lot of problems with that. We have places that are flooding while we're having, long-standing droughts. Like in the 2012 map you see there, most of the United States was under a drought, but we still had places in the state that were flooding. Water quality and quantity, of course, is always that issue, especially like Scott was talking about in Western Kansas. It's a huge quantity issue, and quality for most of the state. Even in the western parts of the states, those fine sands are allowing a lot of nitrates to leach down into the soil profile where they're getting into the water system itself. All right, so looking at this downward spiral of degradation really results from heavy tillage, a lack of cover on the soil surface, and really simplified diversity of these systems. And as organic matter starts to decline, then we see aggregates start to break up and compaction increase. And that aggregate stability results in the surface crusting when it breaks up and sealing. That results in losses of nitrogen in a huge way, and no oxygen in the soil profile itself for a good biological improvement. So then we start seeing infiltration decrease and erosion starting to increase. Organic matter, after a period of time starts to decline slowly. And then our nutrients become loose, as well as the topsoil. Both of those have a tendency to move off of the field. Then we see ponding and water storage issues over this period of time. Nutrient availability is declining, and we've got increased disease pressure because there's the need for more nutrients to be added in the inorganic form. That leads directly to crop yields that are declining, increased hunger and malnutrition. And if you've ever read The Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years by W.C. Loudermilk, which is a free document that NRCS has available, it talks about all of this and how it's all tied together from a decline of a civilization standpoint. So we define soil health as that continued capacity of the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. That continued capacity is really key to this, because when we don't have good soil function, then we start to see these declines that I showed on that previous graphic there. And the soil function, I'll show in the next graph, are those key components that we want our soils to provide to us as a result of manipulating them in a small way to provide food, feed, fiber, and whatnot. And that vital living ecosystem is the key to this whole component. So every bit of this is based on the soil biology. How do we impact the soil biology in a positive way, and how do we care for it? And that ultimately helps us to survive. So it's fairly important. And so we look at the principles that Scott was talking about, and we focus on protecting the soil and the aggregates and the organic matter. That helps protect that soil biology and feeding and fueling it by providing minimizing or maximized continuous living roots and biodiversity with the inclusion of animals into the system if we can possibly enhance that. Maximizing soil cover protects that biology, keeps it at a static temperature, and provides, so to speak, a roof over the house. And that disturbance can be chemical, physical, or biological. And that's really important that we focus in on that to provide this best habitat that we possibly can, because they are the providers, essentially, of all of our soil functions. So here's our soil functions. And like I said, it's all mediated by microbes, and they're really important. And generally, when I'm running the rainfall simulator, we do this verbally. And I ask the landowners, what soil functions do you want your soils to provide? And invariably, the top one here in Kansas is capture and store water. They know that they're at a disadvantage when the water's running off. And some of our more prominent innovators, when asked how much rain they got, will say, I got all of it. And so that's their response, is to try to infiltrate into a system like you see in this picture here, with good cover, living roots, good diversity, and all of the things that are provided. If we don't, when we're looking at soils themselves, the soil health and function, how they go hand in glove together. When we have started out, we had 100% of that full capacity of the soils to function. Once we introduce a disturbance, and that disturbance can be, like I said, physical, biological, or even chemical, any one of those types of disturbances, and we have a soil that's functioning at a high rate, we get really good resistance. And some people call that, when the disturbance comes in, resilience. And so this resiliency is key to this ability to bounce back, is key to this system where we're constantly taking off something in an annual form. That's a big disturbance. That's a carbon drawdown. And it's very hard on soil biology when we're constantly removing and we're not putting back. When our soils are continuously disturbed, though, you can see, like in the case of continuous tillage, high input systems, we end up with soils with low resistance and low resilience. That means they're subject to disease, insect infestation, runoff, all of the things that we saw in that soil degradation slide earlier. But once we start implementing those principles, we can see over time, at this noticeable change line that you can see here, improved soil structure. Initially, the first three components there aren't always visible to the producer. But once they start to see that structure, and they start to see stable aggregates, and they can see that cottage cheese type texture of the soil, and then they'll start seeing that improved water availability, and that gets them really excited. They can start reducing inputs. Soil health can prepare us for any kind of weather extreme. You can see here on the left and the right, this is a real fence in a real field that had a real amount of rain. And on the left, you can see they took it all in. And on the right, we've got ponding and even some ephemeral erosion in the upper right-hand corner of that, which to me is unacceptable. In 2012, when we didn't have rainfall, just to show the resilience of that disturbance, those producers that added cover crops into their system saw increased yields versus no cover crops. And we're not saying that those yields are the type of yields they probably would have liked to have seen in a normal year. They wouldn't be, but the resiliency is there, and that allows them to maintain their profitability over time. Here's the NRCS is involved in these dynamic soil property studies, and this is in South Dakota. And on the left is an invaded bluegrass stand that used to be a native field of tall grass prairie. And on the right, you can kind of see where they have still have that type of system in play. They're using management intensive grazing or AMP grazing or whatever you want to call it on the right hand side, versus set stock on the left side. Where, I mean, if you can see turds, that's a problem. That means you don't have enough grass. So, managing is key here. And then here is a soil profile from each of those. And if you look at that carbon staining, from the biological turnover, and that mineral associated organic matter that's tied to these soil colloids on the right-hand side in those aggregates is it's phenomenally different from the left-hand side, both the same soil type, barn soil, one on the left, one on the right side of that fence. And when they looked at these from an infiltration standpoint, and this is just grazing, so you can imagine the amount of runoff in a cropland scenario because we have no surface cover. The difference in infiltration rate here was pretty phenomenal. Here on the left is a cropland, and then on the right hand side you'll see that rotational grazing scenario. Pretty stark difference in the amount of time it took for 1 inch of water to infiltrate down through that soil profile. So soil health management systems are a group of practices that involves achieving soil health through all of these different scenarios. So a high quality no-till, strip-till type of system, and I'll say probably more no-till than strip-till. Diverse and strategic cover crops that enhance the following crop. Adapted nutrient management that focuses on feeding the soil biology more than feeding the plants so that we can ultimately feed the biology at a reduced cost. Getting that systemic acquired resistance through integrated weed and pest management and spot spraying versus prophylactically spraying entire fields. That's a major disturbance. Putting in buffers like Scott was talking about increases biodiversity and improves predatory habitat areas for a lot of our flowering crops that need it. Diverse crop rotations is really important. I know I worked a lot with Paul Yassa, and he always said that a corn bean system is not a rotation, and it's not a system, it's an oscillation. You're just going back and forth like a fan. We need to add in other crop types and for sure add in more diversity through the use of cover crops and adding in animals. Precision farming technology from the aspect of seeding at different seed rates across the field is pretty key. Also precision application of nutrients and prescriptive buffers, which I talked about, and livestock integration. All of these help develop the soil health management system so that we get quality. All of our soil functions start to improve over time. And like it says, this isn't something that you go to the store and you just buy soil health or you buy it in a jug. It's not a destination. It is a journey, and it is very management intensive. And for some people, that's pretty it's pretty hard for them to deal with. But that's why we're trying to train our folks within the field so that they can help and assist these producers to improve soil health and to help get better adoption of these soil health management systems. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Mr. Brian Rast.
All right. We're going to change fields, so to speak, here and talk about a different community of practice, which is the water quantity. And so we've done this presentation together quite a few times over the past 3 years, I think. Can you guys see my screen? Is the screen showing?
Looks good.
Oh, it is. Okay, good. And so I'm Brian Rast. I'm with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the Kansas City District, and I'm a project manager and a planner, and I act as the Silver Jackets coordinator for Kansas, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about all this. Excuse me, trying to get over a sinus infection, so I hope it doesn't make this a bad presentation. A few years ago, Scott had come to me, and he was looking at the so-called merge of water quality issues with water quantity. And so he had some ideas for some projects. And I didn't think that within a year that I'd be reading a book, A World Without Soil by Dr. Joe Handelsman, but I highly recommend it. And it really did change my perspective on water and hydrology. So let me make sure I got this right here. All right, should be showing the next slide. Okay. So Silver Jackets is sort of the Corps of Engineers idea about getting the states and the communities the right federal assistance technically. And there's a lot of different federal programs out there and some overlap with some missions, but we always try and look at, our goal is not duplicating efforts, but sort of complementing and really getting high quality products to our communities and our state agencies that are requesting them. And so in the case of the Kansas Healthy Watersheds, we had a new partnership. We were used to working with the Division of Water Resources on flood issues because they do the flood mapping. And then we met and understood how the watershed districts are worked on through the Division of Conservation. So we had a new partner there. And then working with Scott, of course, Kansas Division of, or Department of Health and Environment. And so we've done now 2 projects and under these partnerships. And so the challenge, of course, is where's all this water going to go when we see changing conditions? And there's a lot of water coming. The bottom line is shedding it is not helping. And we should be looking at all the tools in the toolbox when we're talking about the measures. And you can see nice pictures of the sediment in the stream there. And I used to think that was coming from the stream banks, but most of that is coming off the fields, shockingly. And you can see a photo of Wildcat Creek in Manhattan during one of the floods. So what did we do about it? As a flood risk manager, I look at these different measures. This is a lot to absorb here, so to speak, on how we can address flood consequences and really try and change either how the floodwaters are impacting us or what's going on in the floodplains. For this particular project, we told headquarters we'd like to look at this soil health nexus, or the soil health management systems that Candy did a good job describing, and see how those kinds of non-structural measures, which are considered land use policies, would affect or even dent the flood flows. And during COVID, we met and we talked about different watersheds that would really work, and we decided that we had the best data for Soldier Creek, with a lot of rainfall gauges and stream gauge information that could help us confirm our hypothetical model. And at the core, we use a lot of different algorithms, and they result in different tools like our hydrology models or our economic assessment and flood consequences models. And we said, well, let's take HMS, that's the hydrologic modeling system, and let's apply it to the Soldier Creek. And we have some gauge sites there. Those are in red, and you can see the capital Topeka is at the bottom of that watershed there. And we developed the graphic for the project and talked about how soils are sponges, and we need to really understand this nexus with the water quality and water quantity issues. And to do that, we involved our Institute for Water Resources Hydrologic Engineering Center out of Davis, California, and we had a couple of subject matter experts helping us from there. And they pointed out that using our green amped model approach, we could use the porosity and the saturated hydraulic conductivity variables to represent what was going on with what Candy's describing and what Scott had also been seeing in the field. And so we took one of these watersheds and we said, okay, we know what the land use is and which of these could actually apply those as land practices, and then what would the, what's the sensitivity analysis going to show for that for any typical watershed. And we also created a lot of different alternatives, and we looked at a baseline condition, and then we did some presumptive, well, what if it was 5% organic matter and 50% of the area? So that means, what percent adoption in the area? That's what the second alternative, that's what that's referring to. And looked at these various adjustments to see what the sensitivity really was throughout these alternatives. And so when looking at alternative number 8 in detail, it kind of breaks down like that, where you got in the columns, pay attention to the, the grazing land and the crop land. So those are the ones we're zeroing in on as a percentage of the area in the watershed, and then how those porosity and KSAT values would change then. And so for the alternative 9, where you see some variable adjustments, we could, for both of those variables, we were seeing as much as an 8% reduction. Now, strangely, another Silver Jackets team was doing a very similar project in Minnesota at the time, and I found out that their values, we ended up talking after the fact and comparing our results and saying, oh, you're looking at that too. What'd you get? Well, up there in Minnesota, they're a little more, they're sandy soils. And so they had a little bit higher percentage reduction in the flood flow downstream. And then we also said, well, if we have changing conditions that have to do with the weather, then in the future, potentially a lot more rainfalls coming. And depending on how we address carbon. And so we looked at these alternatives again and see we can find even more. We can also see a additional reduction. So Scott went over these, he mentioned the time in the field and the kinds of co-benefits, and those are the terms that all of the federal agency use. So FEMA uses the idea of co-benefits, and they want to know, and these are things that are very hard to quantify, and we refer to these as comprehensive benefits, co-benefits, natural nature-based features would be among those, and would have those kinds of things we are still trying to get better at describing. And of course, for the farmer, like Scott was saying, more days in the field. And this picture was actually from one of the field visits we did at the Busing farm, where some of these practices had been adopted. So that's what it looks like under the canopy. So we did a second version of this project, which we're trying to wrap up the final report on, and we're really trying to dig into these different terminologies that we've got and the different partnering agencies are used to using, and trying to get on the same page on that. But really the observation that we should be considering for a lot of investment decisions right now is or what is the measure that is rewarding us most and has the best value. And so we know that dams, these small, like the 566 dams, and this is just a clip map of Kansas here, where there's watershed districts in like almost a quarter of the state. Well, that if they're doing watershed plans, then how can they use those plans to also use these measures and encourage them or incentivize them? Not regulate, but use more types of incentives, and how would that work? So we're still poking at this and trying to see how this would work. We really need to do more monitoring for the values that we're seeing for the water quantity, which we're not used to measuring. We've noticed that universities have been good on collecting the water quality data, but when we look back, we were like, water quantity, where's that data? And so we need to be better at monitoring and understanding that. And when we make a change to a field, and then there's other things we could be doing too. And so that's what this current project is wrapping up on. And there's a white paper that we're developing, and we're still considering some new watersheds. We have a proposal in for a project that would start as soon as the continuing resolution authority ends for the federal government. We think that the proposal we put in scored well enough on their scale that it may be awarded. So we're trying to find that out. So we looked at all these different watersheds, and we want to look at more, and there's a lot of opportunity out there to do that. I think I've gone through most of this data. This is a clip of a map actually from one of those watershed districts plans. And we really want to know, I think this is a great plan or diagram here. If you do these different measures throughout the watershed, then how would you shake that down and tell the story? And economically, you'd want to show one of these benefit cost analysis that would look like this curve here, the cost-effective frontier being in orange, and knowing that, and I could go into, I have a good analogy for this, but I don't think we have time for it, but basically, what is the best buy? And for a few dollars more, it may make more sense to do another alternative. And we don't know what that is yet. We're just relying on our structures right now for the water quantity. So we've done some modeling in this latest project on the flows, and really all the costs we have are limited to cover crops. So we need to collect more data on some of these other practices and the benefits. But our economist has some data, and we're happy to share this and the write-up that we're doing. I think that we're looking at a lot of different ideas, but we're getting somewhere with all this, and we're seeing that if we can get the sensitivity analysis type of things done, we can look more at a watershed perspective and the kinds of trade-offs these comprehensive measures have, that we could probably do a lot of different things. But maybe one of the most basic ones is just maybe we should change our terminology. Instead of calling them watersheds, we should probably call them catchments. And so here are the different levels of activity that we could be doing, and we have a lot of ideas, and we're happy to talk about that more. And if you need to see this information, we'll make these PowerPoints available. All right. Who goes next?
All right, I think Scott, I think we'll turn it over for questions. Do you want them in the chat box, or do you want everyone to open up their mics?
Oh, it's up to them. Either way, we'll answer it any way they want to ask them. I would add something real quick, and we usually take even an hour to do this because it's really three different groups, agencies, and three different processes. But what we looked at was the usual HMS models has a hydrologic group and uses their infiltration rate, some of the other soil data, and they also use the SES runoff curve that was done clear back. The SES runoff curve was done back in the 60s. And we don't think either of those in our state. When I looked at the soil survey, none of those even come close to what we're seeing from people who have 8% organic matter, 8%, 8 inches per hour of infiltration rate. When you put that all together and you have that on a watershed scheme, you're going to have a reduction in peak flow. And so wonderfully, the Corps of Engineers came up with this idea of using the green amp method, and that actually takes the field, this is field infiltration and organic matter from a farm field, and they have a way to make that into the KSAT porosity. Unfortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of data, but I could not find infiltration rate hardly anywhere 4 or 5 years ago when we started this. So now we're hearing more people wanting to know what their infiltration rate is. So that leads me into a real quick also thing. We were limited, but we have actually started working with the state soil scientist here on dynamic properties. And before all this federal issues came around, we had an agreement to go out, and they were going to do infiltration rate compared to aggregate stability side by side to see what those two were in comparison. And what we've heard is from the Soil Health Institute is aggregate stability may be better in looking at watershed soil hydrologic function than infiltration rate, because infiltration rate may only go 3 to 4 inches, where aggregate stability can go much deeper than that.
If anyone has any questions, it'd be a great time to open up your mics or put in the chat box. It doesn't seem to be any questions.
I will add that people ask me about, well, what about the conservation district and the NRCS rule? And what I've told them is, here's an analogy. When I go, buy a car back in the old days, in my high school days, you could actually take a test drive over the weekend. And so I would take that car over the weekend, and the guy said, well, you can call me anytime you have questions. And I called him on a Sunday evening, and I didn't buy the car Monday, but I sure was much more informed. And I think what we're finding is these coaches are available when we hire them through our grant process. They're available, and they walk out of the producer walks out the door on a soil health workshop on a Friday. They cannot talk to really anybody that has any real practical knowledge unless they've talked to the people at the workshop until Monday at the NRCS, the Conservation District. So this is the way that we think we have to do this on a watershed scale, is actually provide, one of the projects we're doing, we provide cost share, we provide cost share for the RAPs, cover crops, we provide a soil health analysis payment, and we pay for coaching. And so we want to be able to try to get them through that first year or two process so they can make sure that they know how to progress forward. And the naysayers or whoever it is that starts talking them out of it, they can go to somebody who really knows what they're talking about.
So Scott, Christine has a question. What has
Sure.
been the producer's response to this initiative?
Well, the producer's response has been really very accepting. And I think part of the reason is because we're trying to find how to benefit them more than just a subsidy or more than just a crop market price. Those things are out of their control. But from the standpoint of if you watch that one Iowa video, he says right there, he says, there are times when you have a drought and there's still things you can do in a drought to provide for that framework for the next season. And this is really all about catching the water when it comes and holding it there until you can use it for your crops. The other thing they like the idea of is it's getting a lot more potential resources involved. And so that's why we're trying to work with FEMA and some of these other folks. The thing about FEMA, though, they work at the impact point. And so it's very difficult for them to justify paying a cost share up to a producer when NRCS, Conservation District, the state does that. But if we're trying to figure out how to get a package deal together, as I described, but the community or whatever the impact point is has to start the process. And that's where we're at right now. We're still looking for those communities.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions, please feel free to keep on putting them in the chat. But I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I just want to invite you to next month's Digital Cafe. We're going to do something. This will be the first time that we have had a presenter talk about urban soil health. So Dr. Anna Palsiva from Purdue is going to come and talk to us about urban soil health and some of the specific issues that urban soil health has. So we do welcome you come back on March 19th. And if you want to put up the survey, you want to do that.
So I will also add that we've been talking to some regional planners about the ability for us to change our soil health, improve our soil health in parks and landscapes to reduce flooding too. And there was actually a project that looked at water quality in Iowa, Des Moines. They paid land owners, these residents in this one watershed, small watershed of a lake, they paid them to aerate and to put humus on their property, on their grass. And they really found that they could reduce the runoff and the water quality impacts as well.
All right. So if there's no other questions, and if you would please take the poll that you see in front of us on your way out, we would really appreciate it. And thank you for coming, and see you next month to learn more about urban soil health. Thank you for all the speakers and the presenters. Did a wonderful job.